Friday here in Los Angeles. We've got a really good topic that I think is very critical for any real estate investor. At some point, you're going to run into a potential tenant that wants to have either a service animal or a emotional support animal. And we want to talk today about how you can verify these animals and make sure you aren't in any violations from the HUD guidelines. So, George, thank you for coming in and talking to us about this. I know that
we've
owned apartment buildings around the country for a while. It's something that we run into on a regular basis, and it's something that as an investor you really need to know. So I think let's start with what's the difference between an emotional support animal and a service animal?
Well, you know what? That's a fantastic question because it's very it's mistaken quite a bit, and they are two distinctly different animals, so to speak. So a service animal is an animal that is specifically trained to help the person out and assist them. So also and emotional support animals may be called assistance animals, but they are typically more to support on the emotional side. So when it comes to a service animal, these are animals such as a guide dog, or a dog that may be pulling a wheelchair, or even a monkey that might be doing the lights or answering the door for a deaf person.
I've got to ask.
So there's all kinds of things.
A monkey?
Yes. Actually, there is no guidelines as to the type of animal that a service animal can be, and there are many different types that have been utilized for that aspect. But typically, most are dogs, but we've also seen small horses that are service animals, like the miniature horses, which are about the size of a dog anyways. So these animals, though, are specifically trained to assist a person for a specific disability. So when it comes to that, a landlord, number one, if they see a blind person guided by a dog, they can't even question whether or not it's a service animal. It's obvious it's there.
In service,
and it's very limited in what a landlord can ask a service animal, a person, as far as what the service animal is. And it really boils down to two questions. What is the animal trained to do? And, is it a need that you need or that was prescribed over to you?
So that's really all you can ask.
That's all you can ask.
They can't even ask for proof. Or details. Yep. So now, if the person can't answer those questions in a succinct manner, then they can delve a little bit deeper. So, because everybody who has a service animal is actually trained as to what they do and what it's supposed to help with. So, if you were to ask somebody, for instance, what is your service animal trained to do? And their answer is, something that's off the wall, or it's like, well, they just provide comfort. That's not really a service animal. Service animal, that turns more into an emotional support animal. And then, but emotional support animals are also protected. So that's something that you want to also consider as a landlord. So emotional support animals typically are more on the psychological side of things, where they're there to help anxiety issues or things like that.
Now, as a landlord, I cannot charge more for those animals, right? If they're going to be in my building, even though I don't allow animals normally, I cannot charge more. Is that correct?
Well, you can't charge more. There's actually a few things you can't do. Number one, you can't discriminate, obviously, against it. You cannot charge more for it. You can't put conditions on it, as far as like requiring insurance, things like that. You can't ask for it to be registered, because there really is no registry. Those are kind of fake, so you can't ask for that. And also, what you can't ask for is you can't ask. You can't discriminate against breeds. So, like for instance, some apartment buildings may say you can have a dog or a pet that's under 20 pounds, but we don't accept breeds such as pit bulls or German shepherds or mastiffs, because they tend to be a little bit more aggressive. But you can't discriminate against that if it's a service animal or even an emotional support animal.
Wow. I can see that getting a little tricky.
It can. And there's a lot of companies that are out there that will provide documentation for an emotional support animal, but for landlords, and that's where it's the trickiest part. Service animals are pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory on that, and pretty easy to vet out. It's the emotional support animals, because a lot of people will just jump in and say, oh, he's an emotional support animal.
Right.
So what does the landlord do at that time?
Yeah, because there's so many people that you can just go online and get it, right? There's
Absolutely.
a lot of scams out there.
You can go online and get it, and actually, under the Fair Housing Guidelines, that actually does not consider proof.
Right.
So, you can ask as a landlord for an emotional support animal. There's really the way to vet it out is to ask for a professional healthcare provider that the person has been seeing, ask for the letter that they have drafted saying that there was a need for this as an emotional support animal.
Right.
The letter should be drafted prior to the person getting the animal.
Sure.
And not afterwards. But at the same time, timing-wise, there's really no guidelines on fair housing because
Pretty gray area.
it's a very gray area because people can, let's say they may not have needed that animal. The animal was a pet at first, but things have changed and now they need it as an emotional support. Maybe they've had a lot of death or trauma in their life or something that recently happened and they need this animal as a support animal. So just because they've had the animal for a long time doesn't mean it's not an emotional support animal if all of a sudden they get a new letter.
Right.
But the letter should come from a healthcare provider that is familiar, that has seen the person, and by seeing, it can also be over the telephone. Interviews, talks, explanations. You can't really ask for details as to why.
Well, you can call the person, right? But you can't ask. You can't violate the potential tenant's privacy.
Absolutely, because it also goes under HIPAA violations.
You can I guess on both sides, right? So
both sides.
So you can really just ask, did you write a letter for this individual?
Bingo, that's it.
That's it.
Did you write this emotional support animal letter? And if they say yes, it is.
Okay, but it can even be a physician's assistant.
It doesn't have to be a doctor. Be a psychologist, physician's assistant, a therapist, that preferably licensed. You can also verify the license. That's the other thing that you can do. It doesn't have to be a doctor.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's key. You really want to make sure you got to go in and make sure you don't go. These guidelines. These guidelines are very key. So HUD guidelines, fair housing guidelines. You want to get online and check and make sure you don't step over those lines. Now, if somebody comes in and they have a leash on their dog that says working dog or whatever, you can get
or support animal or
support animal. That's no good. They don't have a prescription to get that. They can get that at the dog.
I can buy one tomorrow just jumping on Amazon and ordering it. There is no guidelines for that, and actually most true service animals don't even have that. There's no need for that. The animals are actually trained to ignore people, to do a certain thing. So that's not really a real thing. Some people may use it just because they may not want people in certain high density cities to approach the animal and touch them and pet them because people love dogs.
Yeah.
I love dogs.
I'm stuck on the monkey. I kind of want one now.
Yeah. I saw the cutest thing, off topic, but I think people will appreciate this. Look it up. It was a baby monkey riding a goat, and they loved each other, and the goat was helping to feed it. Speaking of monkeys.
Too much time on your hands, maybe, but
yeah.
All right. Well, I think we kind of touched on everything, but it is, folks, it is. Make sure you check out these guidelines. It's very important you don't overstep any of the boundaries that are laid out there. So, thank you, George. Folks, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe and make sure you hit that like button. We'll see you in a couple days.